Mark Rogers TV back talking some college football. We're coming up on a week 5, and of course we bring in each and every week. This has become a staple of the show each and every week on Tuesday night with Joe Lisi of GoForThe2.com. Hey Joe, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well, Mark. Another week of college football. The unexpected. Week 4 provided upsets. I can't wait to see what week 5 presents.
Yeah, you talk about the unexpected, and all I do is turn on the TV and hear these guys talking about the college football playoffs, and these are the teams that are going to be there, and there's no doubt about this, this, and that, and we know better. We see this play out every year. There's going to be some wild cards jump in there, and we'll just have to see week 5 going forward what could possibly happen. So let's dive into it. We've got a good one, Joe, as you well know, on Thursday night. So between USC, UCLA, and Arizona State, and who knows, maybe Arizona jumps in there as well, but those 3 teams could be vying for the Pac-12 South Division Championship. So this is the first of a few huge matchups concerning that one, with UCLA taking on Arizona State. Of course, we've got a quarterback situation on both sides of the field. Both teams coming in at 3-0, trying to get the first big jump toward a division championship.
I'm leaning towards UCLA. There's no word on Brett Hundley, whether he'll play in this game, but Neuheisel, the backup, played very well in relief in the Texas game, 23 of 30, 178 yards, 2 touchdowns. He completed over 76% of his passes. The one concern I have about UCLA, Mark, is the offensive line. They've given up 11 sacks now through 3 ball games. No matter who's the quarterback, they're going to have to play much better against a solid defensive front by Arizona State. But when you look at the Arizona State defense, they're a little suspect in terms of run support, giving up about 197 rushing yards per game. I think the advantage goes to UCLA in this matchup. I'm expecting the Bruins to win this ball game.
Hey, Joe, I was locked in on that UCLA matchup with Texas after the Longhorns got drubbed against BYU, but they showed me something there, put up a fight against the Bruins and took it right down to the end. Neuheisel, like you mentioned, I think you said, 23 out of 30, threw for about $178, played a really good game, and did what they asked him to do. It was all underneath stuff. They put him in good situations to succeed, and then they let him cut it loose with about 90 seconds left in the game and hit Jordan Payton down the left sideline, streaking to the end zone on a fly pattern, threw a pretty ball to the corner of the end zone to win that ball game against Texas. So Neuheisel may be in good shape if they need him to go in place of Brett Hundley, although he doesn't supply, of course, that dual threat capability. I'm looking forward to that one. And again, that's going to be that first big step toward a South Division championship for either one of those teams with UCLA and Arizona State. So let's kick it off at noon on Saturday. We've got one in the SEC Eastern Division. Georgia's been tagged with a loss. They're taking on Tennessee at Sanford Stadium between the hedges. Todd Gurley continues his Heisman candidacy, but more importantly for the Dogs, they want to lock down a big win in the SEC Eastern Division. Tennessee pretty much showed us what they had against a big opponent when they got knocked around a bit against Oklahoma, turned the football over considerably, but Tennessee probably a much improved football team, but they get a chance to show it against the Dogs.
Tennessee usually plays Georgia very tough. You remember this game last year in Knoxville. Georgia built a lead, and then Tennessee came back. They had to fumble through the end zone. When you look at these last 3 ball games, Mark, Tennessee's lost by 3, they've lost by 7, and they lost by 8 respectively. But on the flip side, Georgia's in a position where they have to win out the rest of their season, and they have to win in a big way, sort of like Michigan State. When you look at the offensive weapons that they have, the Bulldogs, Sony Michel stepped up 155 rushing yards. He's a big play threat. They utilize him in passing situations. It's going to put a lot of pressure on Tennessee's defense. You look at McKenzie, another freshman that added the punt return for a touchdown. I think Georgia will be up for this game. It's an SEC matchup, so I expect them to be ready. I think Georgia dominates at home.
Yeah, and Georgia's got that amazing depth behind Gurley at running back. You mentioned Michelle, and also Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, one of their big recruits there. They are a bit questionable wide receiver with Malcolm Mitchell in particular. Scott Justin Wesley, I believe he's questionable as well in this game. Tennessee with Justin Worley throwing the football. We'll see what the Vols have going to Georgia. And you bring up last year's heartbreaker at Knoxville when Pig Howard dove for the pylon and fumbled it through the end zone, or the Vols almost pulled off the big upset. All right, we've got a game in the Big Ten that would not have expected to have been a big one, but it's week 1 in the Big Ten. The conference teams are typically playing across the board. Maryland at Indiana, and those Hoosiers shocked everybody across the board, not just scoring points, but they only gave up 27 to Mizzou, pulling off the big shocker at Columbia. Nate Sudfeld throwing the football, and the Hoosiers coming off with a big win against the SEC. C.J. Brown and Stephon Diggs, the big playmakers there for Maryland. So the Terps coming off a decent win against Syracuse, and then Indiana, of course, with a big upset, their first top 10 win, or top 15 win in like 10 years.
When you look at this Indiana win, very impressive in my eyes, and to go on the road in Columbia, Missouri, against a very athletic defense in Missouri. When you look at the game, though, very balanced, 257 passing yards, 242 rushing yards. Mark, they were 1 of 14 on third down conversions and still won the ball game. Very clean, no turnovers on the road. I like this Indiana team. They're averaging over 300 rushing yards per game, and when you look at Maryland's rush defense, they're giving up 199 rushing yards per game for the Maryland going on the road in back-to-back ball games. Their offense revolves totally around C.J. Brown. As he goes, so does that Maryland offense. I'm looking for a little bit of consistency. I'm not looking for the letdown. I'm looking for Indiana to really take it to Maryland. I like Indiana in this matchup to really make a statement off of last week's upset win.
You know, the heartbreaking loss of last week had to be that Clemson effort against Florida State. They go to Tallahassee, Jameis Winston out of the game. It was all set up for them, and they really delivered the pass rush. The defense looked great all night in McGuire's face, covering the receivers, and then they put the football on the ground, setting up for the game-winning score, have to go to overtime, and then they completely collapse in overtime. So we got Florida State taking on NC State, the Wolfpack, probably the least confirmed 4-0 team we've got in America. You talk about a dumbed-down schedule. They've played absolutely no one, but the Wolfpack steps it up in future weeks, and they get hit hard with a date with Florida State. Jameis Winston back in the lineup, we presume, against the Wolfpack.
Well, let's go statistically. The visitor has lost 5 straight in this series, so that doesn't bode well for Florida State. And when you look at the game last week against Clemson, Mark, I wasn't that impressed with Florida State as a whole. I know Sean McGuire making his first career start, but as a whole, 13 rushing yards on the game. Not a good effort in terms of offensive line production. He was hit a number of times. I believe it was 12 times he was hurried or sacked. That's not a good performance by a veteran offensive line. But when you look at this game, I think they need to make a statement to solidify the #1 ranking, even though the visitors lost 5 straight. I'm expecting a dominant victory by the Seminoles in this matchup.
We got a dominant run team taking on a dominant pass team in the SEC Western Division, Arkansas, Texas A&M. Of course, Kenny Hill came out in week 1 and slung it all over the place at South Carolina with 511 yards, and it's been pretty much a cakewalk for A&M ever since. Now they step into conference play, and they actually have to play some teams. So they've got Arkansas at Aggie Field, Scott Field, Kyle Field. I'm coming up with it. There we go. Taking on Arkansas with the Hogs running the football and really ran it down Texas Tech's throat. Now, this could be a bit of a different situation taking on A&M, but we know what the Aggies have been on defense in recent years, but this should be an interesting matchup.
It is interesting, and if you're rooting for Arkansas, they're really going to need to start fast against Texas A&M. I don't think Arkansas is built to play from behind. You can look at that game #1 against Auburn. They were neck and neck as they fell behind in the second half with Nick Marshall. They had problems catching up. They dominated Texas Tech. A Texas Tech defense that was giving up now 295 yards per game rushing. They're 2 solid running backs, Arkansas, but it's that Arkansas secondary. Kenny Hill and the Aggie offense going to put a lot of pressure on that Razorback defense. How are they going to respond? I think it's imperative for Brett Bielema and that team to start fast. I'm not so sure they have the offensive weapons to really catch up to Texas A&M. I still think Texas A&M holds the advantage with Kenny Hill at the quarterback position in this game.
Hey, Joe, we've got another 3:30 start as we go back to the Big Ten, and I'm not going to pretend that this is a big game, but the reason I include it is because of the situation at Michigan. So we've got the Gophers, Minnesota, at Michigan. What is going on at Michigan? what do you think about the status of Brady Hoke at this point and possibly this game? They have a clean slate to a certain extent, even though they've played so horribly and they're completely out of the mix nationally. Clean slate in the Big Ten, but I don't expect things just to turn and them to blink their eyes and be a better football team overnight.
I don't think so either, but let's talk about last week's performance, Mark. We said it. Brady Hoke, if they lost that ball game, he would definitely be on the hot seat and probably not be there as Michigan head coach. I really don't foresee Brady Hoke being there for next year. I think that a new coach will definitely be in place unless a miracle happens in Ann Arbor where Michigan runs the table and wins the Big Ten championship. How can you see that based off the performance last week in Ann Arbor against Utah? When you talk about numbers against Minnesota, Mark, they're 30-2 against Minnesota. Minnesota's only won 2 games since 1978 against Michigan. Happened in 1986 with Ricky Foggy as quarterback. Happened in 2005 with Gary Russell and Lawrence Maroney as running back. So history is not on the side of Minnesota in this ball game. When you look at passing, they're only averaging 99 passing yards per game. Michigan's run defense only giving up 80 rushing yards per game. So really favors Michigan defensively in this matchup. When you look at Mitch Leidner, the quarterback for Minnesota, he's got a toe injury. His backup is a true freshman. That's basically the numbers. But when you look at Michigan, they're minus 10 in turnover margin now in 4 games. That's a horrific number through 4 games to be a minus 10. When you look at Devin Gardner, he's thrown 5 touchdowns, 6 INTs. I know they haven't made a decision at the quarterback position. They were going to wait until Tuesday. Now, later in the week, personally, I think they go to Shane Morris in this matchup. History's on the side of the Wolverines, but when you look at this team as a whole, not playing very well, I look for a heavy dose of Green, the running back, and I think I really think this game's a toss-up, but from a numbers perspective, you have to think that Michigan pulls it out some way.
Well, they've got better talent. I don't think there's any question about that, but the talent is just not playing. I don't know what's going on there because I was going through the recruiting rankings since Brady Hoke arrived. I was going through them today. Top 5 class, top 7 class. Then he had like a mid-15, mid-teens class, and then he kind of dropped off this last year. But if you combine that, you're talking about top 10 to top 15 classes for 4 consecutive years, and they're just not playing. And then he's got a veteran defensive coordinator in Greg Madison. The defense isn't horrible. It's definitely not dominant. It's not an elite defense by any stretch, but it's not horrible. Then he's got Doug Nussmeier that he's brought in from Alabama doing the offense, and the offense is horrid, just horrendous, horrid, and it's just not working. The recruiting rankings say that they've got talent on the field. They've got 2 experienced, accomplished, successful coordinators, and they're just tripping over themselves. They can't beat anybody that's any good. And it's just pitiful to watch. They scored no touchdowns against the 2 main opponents on their schedule, Notre Dame and Utah. They had to have a pick 6 by a lineman to put any points on the board against the Utes last week. It's tough to watch.
It really is, and we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, coaching up the talent. You could have top 5 classes, but what do you do with the time that they're freshmen to the time that they're seniors? Obviously, something's going on with the coaching in Ann Arbor because top 5 talent and top 10 recruiting classes should equate to wins on the field, not the lack of success that Brady Hoke and that staff are having. So I think it really falls on the coaching staff, and it all falls on the head coach and Brady Hoke. You look at what Mark D'Antonio does. I keep saying Mark D'Antonio coaches up his talent. That's why Michigan State is showing success on the field. Brady Hoke is not.
All right, let's take it out back out to the Pac-12 here because we've got a matchup with one of the elites in the Pac-12 North, Stanford, and one of the wannabes in Washington. The Huskies coming off a bye. They've swept through that non-conference slate that was really light, with Hawaii and Illinois being probably the 2 toughest on paper, but they got challenged by Eastern Washington 59-52. Then you got a Stanford team that's still got to be kicking itself for dominating the game in regards to yardage and first downs and every other statistical category against USC, but they let it slip away, and they kept getting turned back in the red zone. So we got Stanford, we got Washington, and how do you see that one playing out?
Well, I mean, my first instinct, Mark, was to say that Stanford dominates this ball game because you mentioned when Georgia State's winning at the half 14-0 over Washington, how could you like that performance? But when you delve into the numbers a little bit more, you start seeing where maybe Washington has a chance. Washington's +9 in turnover margin, and Mark, through 4 ball games, Washington has 19 sacks. Their defensive line's playing very, very well, led by Danny Shelton. He's got 7 sacks already through 4 ball games. So very solid defensive front by Washington. They match up very well against Stanford. You look at that game last year, Ty Montgomery in Palo Alto took the opening kickoff the distance, and they jumped out ahead. But credit Washington for battling back. They had an opportunity to win that ball game in the very end, just couldn't convert on a key 4th down. But I think Chris Peterson will have a good game plan in place. I think they can keep it close. I'm not sold on Stanford yet going on the road. I like Kevin Hogan at the quarterback position, but when you look at that defense, I think they can keep them in the ball game as long as they can run the football, put some pressure on that Stanford defense. I look for Miles to possibly have a big day, and possibly Washington could upset Stanford in this matchup. It's a very difficult place to play in Washington. Should be a great, crazy atmosphere, their first real test, so to speak, and I think Washington comes up for this ball game.
Yeah, we did a Stanford-Washington preview a few days ago. I'm looking forward to seeing Siler Miles for the first time with Price gone and with Sankey gone, some new personnel on offense. Ross at wide receiver already has 3 touchdown receptions going into last week. And so Washington looking to spring the upset. We know the Stanford personnel, and they're gonna be there. They're gonna compete. Well, it'll be interesting to see how Washington responds at home. I'm going to put the Buckeyes on upset alert. I think this is a dangerous game for Ohio State hosting Cincinnati this week. Again, J.T. Barrett's going to have to get his game together. He had a big game against Kent State, but we can kind of discard that to a certain extent because of the obvious 66-0 opponent there. Ohio State, man, we talk about Michigan. Now, it's not gotten to that point with Ohio State. I expect the Buckeyes to have a respectable season, but things just don't seem to be clicking. They have more issues than just a quarterback. They've not found an elite running back to replace Carlos Hyde. They've got a lot of 4- and 5-star guys that aren't producing to that level, aren't the beast that guy was. The defensive line is pretty much the mainstay. They've got a great defensive line. The back 7 still not pulling its weight, and they need to find a consistent, dynamic guy that's in the Percy Harvin mode that Urban Meyer's used to from his days at Florida.
I agree with you. I think Cincinnati poses a big threat for Ohio State this weekend. When you look at quarterback Gunnar Kiel, came out against Toledo, threw a school record 6 touchdown passes. He could really stretch the field against a suspect Ohio State secondary. It's a rivalry game, so to speak. Cincinnati always plays Ohio State tough. I think Cincinnati could pose the upset as well. I like Kiel at the quarterback position. Tuberville, good big game coach. He's been there before. I look for him to have the Bearcats up for this ball game. I don't know if they actually get the upset, but I think they push Ohio State to the limit.
I sure do, too. I think this is a dangerous game for Ohio State, even at the shoe. Go back to the SEC, and we got a game here where Mizzou, in losing Ely and losing Sam and losing E.J. Gaines, one of the best corners in the country, most prognosticators expect them to take a step back or 2 back in the SEC Eastern Division. They come out, they win all their games, they beat Central Florida very impressively, so we're expecting Missouri possibly to challenge in the East, and then thud, they hit rock bottom against Indiana. Now, I'm not going to go overboard and blow that out of proportion in what they showed us last week. Now they go to South Carolina in a game that's almost a must-win situation, the way the East is playing out between these 3 or 4 teams that we expect to vie for the championship. These games are crucial. So we got Mizzou, we got South Carolina, of course, looked horrible in week 1, and then take on Georgia and really show up on offense in that game. Hopefully Joe's still with us. South Carolina taking on Missouri. setting that up with Matty Mock and the Tigers going to South Carolina. Hopefully Joe can join us here in just a second. If you hear us again, Joe, just jump on in. Otherwise, I'll take us on down.
Mark, they were leading 17-0 heading into the fourth quarter against China. And that was with Dylan Thompson at the helm for South Carolina.
I think we lost Joe again. Again, we've got Missouri taking on South Carolina. The Gamecocks at number 13 in the country after the win a couple weeks ago against Georgia at home. North Carolina, Clemson. The Tigers coming off a big effort at Florida State, but they outplayed the Noles but couldn't close the deal, losing overtime against the backup quarterback, Sean McGuire. North Carolina, wow, what happened to the Tar Heels in taking on the Pirates of East Carolina and giving up 70 points? And Joe, hey, if you rejoin us at any time, just jump on in and give us some analysis here. North Carolina taking on Clemson, this one in Death Valley. You got to love Clemson coming back. They've made a decision on their quarterback. That was the one positive coming out of Florida State, is that Cole Stout's the backup. Deshaun Watson is the guy to take this team forward as a freshman, and I believe that's the right call that Dabo Swinney is making there, because that kid has got top-level talent, both throwing the football and running with it, and he's not out of control. He took care of the football against Florida State, played extremely well in that game against one of the top 5 defenses in college football. North Carolina at Clemson, that's a 7 o'clock game on Saturday. Finally, we wrap it up, and we'll hopefully get Joe back in here to talk up Notre Dame taking on Syracuse. Didn't expect at this point for the Irish's toughest game through 4 games. They're going to get much tougher down the line, but they're toughest out of the 4 games thus far. Not to be Michigan, it's probably Syracuse. The Cuse, after a couple wins over inferior foes in Villanova and Central Michigan. Syracuse took on Maryland to the Big Ten and got taken to school at the Dome, 38-13 in that game. But Notre Dame into the top 10. Again, the Michigan wins not looking that impressive. They beat Rice, they beat Purdue, so everybody's excited. A lot of people, I should say, excited about Notre Dame, number 8 in the country. But how good is Notre Dame really at this point with those 3 victories under their belt? So we're going to start to find out against Syracuse to a certain degree, but much later on, Notre Dame with one of the tougher schedules in the country over the back 6 or 7 weeks. When you look at Stanford, Florida State, and USC, amongst the teams that Notre Dame will have to play down the stretch. Would love to get Joe back on the line to talk these last 3 games with. Hey, Joe, you with us?
Yes, I'm here. I apologize. We had
don't worry about it, Joe.
Technical difficulties, but I can go back into Missouri and South Carolina.
Yeah, let's jump back
right now.
Doing the Gamecocks.
Missouri, if you remember this game last year, Mark, Missouri was winning this game 17-0 heading into the fourth quarter with Dylan Thompson at the quarterback position. If it wasn't for Connor Shaw coming off the bench and leading the Gamecocks to 17 fourth quarter points to send that game into overtime, South Carolina really would have been left for dead in that game. But they came back, they got victory in a memorable SEC matchup. I like defensively against South Carolina in this ball game. They have some offensive line issues that they're going to switch around some guys due to injuries, some wide receiver issues, but defensively very athletic, and I think they match up very well with the South Carolina offensive line. Couple that with some against a suspect South Carolina secondary, a very young, raw secondary. We mentioned it. First couple of ball games, inexperience. I don't think that has gotten fixed in 4 ball games, and I expect Missouri to challenge South Carolina and get the upset in Columbia.
Yeah, that was one of the more exciting games that I saw last season, and one of the more impressive comebacks, considering the opponent, considering the atmosphere on the road. And like you say, Dylan Thompson couldn't get the job done, and then Connor Shaw comes in and erases 17-0. Mizzou misses the big kick, and Carolina wins it. And then at that point, Mizzou was not only playing for the SEC, but they were in the national championship hunt. And it should be a fun one to watch on Saturday night. We also want to run down North Carolina and Clemson. The quarterback situation seems to be sorted out with Dabo Swinney choosing Deshaun Watson over Cole Stout at this point. I think that's the right decision. I know that Cole Stout's got the equity in the program in the 4 years, but Deshaun Watson, you can just see the clear difference in the ceiling, and he's not a kid playing out of control. Takes care of the football, has a great arm, running ability, big, strong kid. I just think that's the obvious choice, and Clemson's going forward with Watson at quarterback. How do they rebound after the crushing loss? And then looking at North Carolina, wow, they give up a 70 spot to East Carolina. That's tough to take.
They did run into one of the hottest teams in the nation in East Carolina, very underrated. If people didn't know who Ruffin McNeil and the Pirates were 2 weeks ago, they certainly know who Shane Carden, Justin Hardy, and Isaiah Jones against North Carolina, who some were calling one of the best teams in the ACC. But when you look at this matchup numbers-wise, Mark, North Carolina since 1982 is 2-11 in Death Valley. They've dropped 3 straight by an average of 25 points per game. Now, that being said, I expect a rebound by the Tar Heels to play much better going up against Deshaun Watson making his first start. It's a little bit different when you're coming off the bench. You're a little more loose now, a little more pressure falling on the freshman's shoulders. I think he performed very well in Tallahassee. He gives an added dimension for Clemson, but it's still his first career start in Death Valley at home. I think North Carolina pushes Clemson to the limit, but in the end, Clemson does pull out a very close victory.
All right, Joe, we're going to wrap it up with Syracuse Notre Dame, and I would have never guessed that through 4 weeks that this would be Notre Dame's probably toughest test, considering that Michigan has been a complete dud to date. So that 31-0 over Michigan at this point doesn't look quite as impressive as it normally would. Notre Dame, people are getting excited about Notre Dame being in the top 10, and they're 3-0, but Rice, Michigan, and Purdue. So we haven't really seen anything out of the Irish. I'm not questioning that they're a talented team and that they'll be strong. The schedule's going to get really tough here right after Syracuse, but for Saturday night, they've got the Cuse coming off the loss where they didn't look so good against Maryland, turned the ball over all over the place at home after they had won their first 2 games against Central Michigan and Villanova. So we got Syracuse Notre Dame, Joe.
I originally thought that Syracuse had an opportunity in this ball game just because it was Notre Dame, but when I broke it down a little bit more, Mark, you look at the quarterbacks, Everett Golson for Notre Dame and Terrell Hunt for Syracuse, not really making good decisions in the pocket. When you look at Syracuse right now, Terrell Hunt's really an athletic quarterback. He could really create a lot of plays with his legs and his arm, but really not performing well, not making good decisions, going up against a very disciplined defense in Notre Dame. When you look at Notre Dame, they played 2 weeks ago against Purdue on a neutral field site in Indianapolis, didn't perform all that well against Darrell Hazel's club. Now they're coming off a bye week. They have Stanford on deck. I think Notre Dame's up for this matchup. I like Notre Dame's front 7. And when you look at Syracuse as a whole, not really stretching defenses vertically, so you have to give the edge to Notre Dame in this matchup. Couple that it's a national stage in MetLife, I think it favors Notre Dame big in this game.
Yeah, I can't wait, Joe, to see Notre Dame take on some of the tougher teams on their schedule, most notably Florida State. Then it's Stanford, it's USC, it's Louisville. It's some really tough matchups, and we'll really see what the Irish have under Brian Kelly this year. All right, Joe, we appreciate the insight and the information. It's good stuff always to get together with you. I love doing this each and every week, running down the big games of the week.
It makes my Tuesday, Mark. There's nothing better than talking college football with you. It should be an interesting week. I can't wait to see how it plays out, and we'll be back next week talking about it.
All right, Joe. See you next time.